Hello, everybody. This is Michael Tabb. We are in week one of the June class of 2018 in the Creative Writing Master of Fine Arts program. The classes that I am meeting with are character creation and development, as well as writing for film and animation, which is basically screenwriting class. This week, the students in one class came up with their first premise, which is one of the hardest things to do in all of writing, is figuring out what it is that's original that you have to say to the world, and then and then pick what genre you want it to be in, and start imagining what that genre looks like and all the things you could bring to visually personifying what it is you want to talk about if you do it in that genre. The other class did those things as well as they're building their concept for a film, but they also went in the details of what the other class is going to be working on this week, which is developing a protagonist with an inner and outer journey, an antagonist with a physical goal that conflicts with the protagonist's physical outer journey, and the opportunity to really delve into some supporting characters, including the love interest, the mentor, and the ally slash protagonist's reflection character. And then they also wrote a log line. So you're each are both going through the process of developing new material. Some of you are just starting. Some of you have had a little bit more practice now, having been in the program for a couple more months. But it's all the same process you've been taught. So bada bing, bada boom. That's what brings us here today. Now I open up the floor to any questions any of the students who have come to this meeting feel like asking, and the floor is yours. Do any of you have any questions today? Feel free to unmute your own microphones when you speak. And sometimes it takes a moment. And sometimes they just have no questions because I teach this so well that nobody has anything to question or ask. Okay. They're laughing, really. It's just that their microphones are muted. Okay, so if you don't have any questions, Ms. Miner, did you have a question?
Yes, with the we're doing that three-act structure with the revised foundation stuff.
Absolutely.
With our three-act structure breakdown, we're only doing stage 1 and 6 with the 5 turning points.
That is
Are
correct.
we moving through essentially the entire story, or like if it's more like proof of concept, would it be like
What we're
maybe a
trying to do,
condense, or is it condensing like
we're trying to do
what your idea was?
we're trying to do a full three-act structure and a proof of concept in one. These are two separate things, but what we try to do to make something really appear to be proof of your ability to tell story is you're not going to prove that you can tell a story as a writer if you want to be writers if you just write a basic proof of concept that shows a scene of what the movie might be about. What you want to do if you want to illustrate your ability to tell a story that's well told, you will make it a proof of the concept of what you're doing, but also it is a three-act story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, obviously, that beginning, middle, and end um, need to follow the turning points in the scripts, and that's why I don't have you do stages 2 through 5, honestly, because there's not enough space in the script to do all the stages and all the turning points if we're going to write a 10-page short. Uh, but you can hit these other beats and have them influence each other and drive each to the next escalation in the turning points, which is how you show good mastery of storytelling. So you're going to write an opening, which is stage one, which is you'll introduce a protagonist who's flawed. That you definitely do. You don't necessarily have to show the arc, but you want to try because that shows true mastery when you can actually tell a complete story and justify the change internally of a character based on the experience you put them through. So at the beginning, something happens. It's all on the first page. You introduce a protagonist, a flaw in conflict. Okay, there's conflict there. It's a common conflict. It's something that's not a change from the normal life, but it illustrates what their flaw is and possibly how they are used to mute for just a second while I explain it, if you would, so that the kids aren't. Uh, Thank you so much. Because you want to show the flaw, but you also show that flaw also reveals a skill. Because when a character has a flaw, they've compensated for having that flaw by developing a skill. Somebody who's cowardly knows how to stay below the radar and hide and do things like that. Somebody who is overconfident can often convince people to do things because they can pretend or actually show belief in something so much that you kind of go, yeah, okay, because you believe that guy because he's so confident. He wouldn't say it that way if it weren't true. You can convince people. Some people are great salesmen, and then or as some people may say, great liars. So there's a benefit. There's a skill set that comes with whatever the flaw is that you've designed for your character, and then the character is going to realize they can't continue without fixing that flaw if they want to get whatever it is they're going for in the story. So then, at inciting incident, the first turning point in the story, which is roughly bottom of page one, top of page two, something happens that is not normal to the protagonist, and it inspires them to look at their options, and this is what's going to inspire them to change. Something happens that changes the way they're viewing how they're going about their lives, how they are relying on their character flaw or covering up for it. And then at turning point one, or turning point two, which is the end of Act One, which is one quarter of the way into the story, which is page two and a half in a 10-page story, the protagonist will, in the wake of those situations, will make a decision that will change their lives forever to go on the outer journey and do something to pursue it. Then at the midpoint, which is halfway, which is roughly page five, you're looking at a moment that allows the protagonist to realize, oh my God, I did not realize how bad this could possibly go. Because usually when we decide to do something and we're motivated to make a change, we don't realize exactly what we stand to lose. And it's at the midpoint the protagonist finds out, oh my gosh, this is what's really on the line if I mess up. So the stakes really rise through the roof at that point. And that's the middle and the core center of your film. So that at three-quarters of the way in the story, roughly page seven to seven and a half, the protagonist realizes, not only has realized what's the worst that can happen, but it actually does happen there. And it looks like the protagonist is not going to get what they set out to do one quarter of the way into the story back on page two and a half. And then after they lose it, this is why your protagonist, a lot of people call a protagonist a hero, is because in the wake of losing everything structurally, the protagonist still decides to get up, brush off their knees, brush the dust off from whatever horrible thing happened, and then go back into the fray and charge into the climax, knowing what they stand to lose, knowing how bad it is, and knowing that the odds are against them, and they still fight to succeed. And then, of course, it either works out or it doesn't, depending on the ending you've designed for your story. And at the very end, the last half a page, you would kind of bookend it, bookend your story with a last stage that kind of shows, okay, having gone through this journey, did the protagonist change from how they were at the very beginning of the story? So you'll look at the character flaw they had in the beginning, and then you'll see how they've overcome that character flaw in the end, usually in a very similar common crisis that they started the film with. So if in the beginning the common crisis was running late for school to get the kids to school, at the end she does it differently now, and she doesn't have the problems she did because if the, like for example, if her flaw was that she was never prepared for anything and she was always flying by the seat of her pants, she's prepared for every mistake and everything, and she's now the queen of getting kids on time to school. If that was the story. So that's the three-act story. That's what you're going to tell. You could tell it as about something as simple as trying to be a better mother, and their goal is to be nominated for the Mother of the Year award and win it, or something like that. I don't know. But make sure the stakes are high, that it means a lot, that in going through this challenge, it looks like some of the things she does to get ahead, for example, might lead to her losing her children. She gets reported because the other mother wants it, so she gets reported to child endangerment or something. You got to make it clear that their stakes are high, the conflict is real, and that the goal is leading her on a journey that is not easy to deal with. Because if it were easy, if we wanted to be, we'd be bored, and if we were bored, we'd stay home and not spend the money on a movie. And you want to show people who you're going to show this film to that you know how to show and tell an engaging story full of action and drama and whatever it is you're trying to show, that it has stakes and conflict and it's interesting and you want to know what's going to happen next, and that it did keep building, showing how you know how to mount tension over the course of a story. You start with some tension. You never don't have conflict in a scene, never, but it builds throughout the story. Okay, so that's kind of what you need to do. That's the outlining plot points that you'll need to hit when writing the outline for this week's class. Now that you did the foundation in last week, Ms. Miner, do you have any questions about those turning points, the things I said? No, I do not, she says. All right. Hopefully I answered all the questions you had about it. I just thought I'd go over it. So I just went over the homework assignment for that class. Um, Ed, please feel free to chime in. Remember also, it's like Einstein always said. He said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't know it well enough. So don't over explain things. The turning points are one specific point in the story when things change. So every one of of the five turning points and even the stages that are written, each thing is only one sentence. You have to be able to as a writer convey with absolute clarity what the moment is that things change. This is what you'll need to be able to do in a room when talking with development executives and with producers when they're saying, okay, so what's going on here and where are you building to? And you need to know this is the major point here, this is that major point, and you need to be able to talk to them in three act structure terms and explain it. Because when you go into a pitch one day, if you're lucky enough to be called in the studios to pitch, you kind of figure out a way, like your short film is 10 pages, you kind of figure out a way to tell the three act story verbally in 10 minutes. And you're hitting the plot points, explaining them. Okay, I'm here in the script. We're at the inciting incident, which is a tenth of the way into the story. Then we're at the end of Act One. Here, this is the climax of Act One when the character is going to make a choice that will change their lives forever and make a big bold move. That's turning point two, what Sid Field calls uh, a plot point one. Everybody has a different name for it, but it's all the same thing, guys. Everybody kind of has the same structure. You don't have to worry like, but wait, is that this or that? It may be the same thing because different people have different words for it. uh, I had gotten asked to write a book about storytelling and how I build story, and I called them escalations. Instead of calling them turning points or plot points, I call the different points the three E's: establishings, which is the opening and the closing of the film, which is what there's like stage one and stage six, and then there's the escalations, which are what Michael Haig calls turning points, and then all the stages in between I call evolutions, because that's when the character is evolving between those major turning points. Between those moments, those are the moments when the character is realizing, in the wake of those changes that are these strong points that happen, the structure points, that they're going to have to evolve, and they are evolving, and they're trying to change after the situations of the five major turning points, which I call escalations, because they're escalations. Um, so those are my three E's. But it all means the same thing. Everybody uses the same structure. They just call it different things, and it's confusing. That's why in my book at the end, I just explained to everybody in the book, look, this means this and that term, this and that guy's philosophy, this and that, it's all the same thing. And in the book, I explain that so you don't get confused if you read several different books on the subject. But everybody's got something new to add to it, so they're all worth reading. And you may like somebody's better, and you'll wind up using that for yourself as your days go on as a writer. All right. Are there any other questions from anybody else here today? Please feel free to unmute your microphone and ask away. Okay.
have a question.
Yes, sir.
It's actually to do with premise, and it's really just kind of trying to just pick your brain on something. I'm wrestling with the clarity in my premise, and essentially what I'm trying to say is that loneliness can make someone believe that somebody has feelings for them that aren't real. That's not real. Makes you see things that aren't there, you know,
Okay.
and that's going to make them take risks based off of that. So I've been trying to figure out how to make that concise.
Uh, so I'm seeing that hallucinations are a lonely man's um, cattle prod to take action in finding love.
Hallucinations are okay.
I mean, it's kind of what you're saying. Somebody's hallucinating a relationship or fabricating something in their own head. And then,
Right.
so what you're saying is lonely, and we're going to reword this.
Okay.
Loneliness, loneliness will drive people to imagine connections they don't have
Right. Okay.
in order to achieve relationships they desperately
Would
want.
that be boiled? That okay? Well, that would that be boiled down to loneliness creates desperation?
No, because you're what I think I think what you're saying is far more intricate and detailed. The one what I
Right.
just said I thought was pretty good. What did I just say?
Said loneliness will drive people to imagine connections they don't have.
And so that they can form relationships they desperately want.
Okay, and then I can boil that down.
Yes. Now you could
To,
say loneliness. No, what was your shortened version? Loneliness is
well, it creates desperation, but I agree with you. That's not exactly what I'm trying to say.
yeah, and it's also duh.
Yeah, 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 exactly.
When somebody
Well,
is so incredibly lonely, of course they're desperate.
right.
They're in a
Well,
place
that's why
of
my
nobody.
original premise that you didn't like was loneliness creates false impressions.
Mm.
And
Well, that I didn't quite see as much because
okay,
because a false impression. I don't know how loneliness creates it, but I do understand that loneliness inspires people to see relationships that aren't there.
okay,
That might be another way of saying it.
yeah, I
Loneliness
like that a lot.
inspires people to see relationships that aren't really there. But that would mean at the end of your film, what you're trying to say is that you're lonely, and just because you imagine you have friends, that doesn't mean you're going to actually have friends when it's all done anyway. It's
Right.
very, if you want this person to find a way out of loneliness, your premise needs to be how somebody finds their way out of loneliness. If at the end you want a happy ending and this person is no longer lonely, and this imagination led him to finding a relationship with somebody real, then that's what you need to give us the solution of, because that's what you're trying to say with your movie. Now, if what you're trying to say is, and it's either one is fine, by the way, but you have to know what you're trying to say in the end of your movie. Are you trying to say that lonely people may imagine things to help them get over the hump of getting
Well,
finding a relationship again, or are you saying that once you're lonely and you can't and you're going to start to imagine that you have relationships, but sorry, you don't? Well, which is it? Which is it you're trying to say with the end of your
well,
story?
it kind of makes him imagine both. He imagines there's a relationship and he acts on it, and it doesn't go well for him, and he ends up with the person he's supposed to be.
With the person he ends up with the person he's supposed to be with or supposed to be. He ends up being who he's supposed to
With the person who he's supposed to be. He was my reflection character, really, or my mentor character.
be. Okay. So So what you're saying is when you're lonely, beggars can't be choosers. No.
Yeah,
No.
basically.
So what you really want is a protagonist who's saying something to the effect of, um, lonely people are led astray by their imaginations on who they could have relationships with, as opposed to, or when you're lonely, build relationships with the people who are close to you, not those you wish you had relationships with.
Okay, I
You know,
gotcha.
these are all things you could use.
Right.
You have to decide where your film is going and what it is you want to say to the audience. The best way, you could be saying the best way out of loneliness is to find someone close to you, not someone find someone close to you, not necessarily someone you dream of being in a relationship with. That's not going to be your answer. In other words, don't shoot for, if you're lonely, don't spend your time shooting for relationships that are just going to keep you lonely.
Right.
There's a little bit of realism there. It's almost like don't flirt with people out of your league.
Right. Yeah.
you know,
Or married people.
well, don't do that either.
Yeah.
Definitely
Exactly.
don't do that. That's wrong. Oh, it's so wrong. Ugh, people
Great.
like that,
Thanks.
they astound me. You bet. Does that help?
That does. Yeah, I think so. That helps a lot.
All right. And there are any number of those you could use, but you have to ask yourself what you want the end of your movie to say. Now that you've come up with, the neighborhood, and you actually, it sounds like what we came up with as ideas for a premise led you to a story idea, and the story ideas you develop, it may inspire you to redevelop the premise. But just make sure as you change the premise, if you develop it further beyond what it was originally as you built the story around it, you have to then go back, and after you fix the premise, you have to make sure all the other things are in line still. So if you change the premise, you have to make sure the inner journey of the protagonist fits the new premise, not the one you had. You may have to change some things. That also means that if you're changing the inner journey, that means you also have to change the love interest and what they are doing. Everything is a house of cards, and everything leans on everything. So if the cards all of a sudden change, then everything has to change to hold it together. So don't forget that if you fix one thing, look at how it affects every other wall in the house of cards and make sure it applies. That way it's a cohesive singular story. Aha! Aha! That's my old Jewish grandfather voice. Aha! Okay. Does anybody else have any questions? I'll take that as a no. I will take 1 second and talk about this week's class for character creation and development. You're doing what we call the character dossiers this week for a protagonist and an antagonist. Do not forget I will have you notes by Friday night on all your on all the premise that you submit, which ones I think work, and hopefully it'll be the one you submitted, and what doesn't and why, if it doesn't work. And you'll need to use that to develop your protagonist, inner journey, outer journey, and antagonist. And you want to make sure you follow the wording. There is very specific wording you use for each one of these things, for each of these characters. Fill in the blanks and make sure what you fill in the blanks is exactly what the thing in the parenthesis that explains what's supposed to be in the blank tells you to put in there. And then do not forget, students still sometimes forget to write the character introduction action line that would be their introduction in a screenplay. It's a screenplay, one sentence character introduction. Would you introduce this character cinematically in a movie that illustrates, if it's a protagonist, their flaw, and if it's an antagonist, their skill? or their power, and you've got to make sure it's sizzling. Because remember, when you write a character entrance, if you want people to remember who that character is in the next scene they show up in, you better have written them a good entrance, because otherwise they're not going to remember, because not every role is going to be played by someone famous. And it's not going to be, oh, Tom Cruise is back. Okay. It's not going to be that easy. You're going to need to make sure the character itself is so strongly written that every time they walk in the screen, they don't forget who you're talking about. And believe me, in some people's writing, they put too many characters and they can't keep them straight. So remember, strong, strong entrance moments. Write those. One sentence, not run on sentences. No run on sentences, everybody. And then I really like to see a full, I'd love to see a full page on the character history you guys come up with that explains why the character would have that flaw, or why the antagonist is going after what they're going after in the story. Really try to figure out why your characters are the way that they are. There are some great questions in there. There's tricks to helping you visualize who the character is, how they live, what their past is, what their present is, and how they're living in the present, and who they're living with, how they grew up, what they think and how they think, and then what they want and they need. What they want and need will relate a lot to inner and outer journey, by the way. And that's that. I really want to see a lot of detailed thought on the big paragraph answers, and on the things that are simple. I expect simple, strong, succinct answers, very clear, very precise. I want to know that you know what you're talking about. All right, and that's that. This is one more chance to offer everybody an opportunity to ask any questions. Yes or no? Please feel free to take it. Last chance.
I have another question.
Yes. Yes, please.
As we have like our foundation information, when we're doing these turning points, because we are including like the love interest, the mentor, the reflection, are we kind of taking those characters in account with the turning points? Like, will we be using all of these characters in this short?
No, you don't have to. The characters I recommend people use in a short would be the protagonist, the antagonist, and if you want to emphasize the character arc and show you can masterfully do that, you can use the love interest. I tend to think that there's really not much time for mentors and reflection characters, though. You may use them as conflict raisers. Like, for example, somebody who's on the side of the protagonist could get killed if the stakes are life and death. You could kill somebody at the midpoint or turning point two, or I mean turning point. That's plot point two. It's turning point four. Everybody's got a different word for it. End of Act Two. But yeah, yeah. Um, but I like to tell people to. I think the love interest is important if you see it helping with. If you see it helping with the inner journey being approached, but you don't have to have it. Really, you need antagonist and protagonist. Those are the two characters you definitely need. Every other character is just to help you fully flush out or better realize uh, the points of view you might be offering uh, to prove or disprove your own premise, so that you put up a good argument. And if one of those perspectives isn't needed for the short film to say something you feel needs to be said in short form, then get rid of it. You don't need it now. You'll save it for using it in the feature film version, which hopefully you will write for yourself when you're done with the class.
Okay, and then I have one more question about
There's no limit.
the
You can ask as many questions as you want.
on our visualizations,
Mm-hmm.
how we're writing those. Um, but like one of your notes was kind of, for me, was kind of adding like more physical actions.
Yes.
Like, would that be things that you would kind of see people doing, or?
Yeah, here's what you want to do. You want to make sure you really realize the genre completely. Like, if you have something in genre that you've already put in there that does fit the genre, ask yourself, how are you going to cinematically use that visually in a visual story narrative? So you put the words in around it that allow you to fill it into a situation that kind of says, oh, this is how I could use that. If I'm writing a Western, we have tumbleweed. Somebody, you're used to seeing a tumbleweed rolls through the town as a sandstorm approaches. But you want to do something original? A guy grabs a tumbleweed rolling through town, turns around and rakes it across his enemy's face.
Okay.
Or a woman's being chased by a mean cowboy, and she takes it and shoves it between them to keep him from attacking her. Think of ways to use the genre ideas and images you've come up with to put them in visual story situations. The key is keeping everything visual, because film, which is what we're writing films, not a television show, films, a single story format. Films are a visual medium, and we want to show, not tell.
Okay.
Did that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions?
Um,
Does anybody have any questions? Any more before we end the session? Ms. Hinson, you just joined us. Did you have any questions for me before we finish up? Everybody's muted themselves. All right, so I'm going to assume that nobody has any more questions because everybody has muted. All right. Just so you know, I am going to hit save on this recording, and then I'm going to put it on my YouTube channel so anybody can watch. And and go over it, whether you need to hear something again or whatever. I want to thank you for coming out, and I answered every single question you have. So hopefully you feel I did my job. Even though I technically don't have to do these, but I like to do them because I like to connect with my students. And it's been a pleasure talking with you. Thank you for coming, and you all have my email if you need me for if you have any questions or anything like that. All right, thank you and good day.